I know that the format in this class generally is to go over the Torah portion. When I looked at my Facebook today, I saw that I'm going to be speaking about war and redemption. So what I'm going to do is take the two concepts and sort of tie them into one thread. So just because I think the last class I started the same with a story of the first Chabad Rebbe, that he made a statement saying that a Jew has to live with the times. And to live with the times doesn't mean to necessarily be current with what's going on with the world, as much as it means that we're supposed to live with the message of the weekly Torah portion.
Right.
So the weekly Torah portion has a lot. It's a very interesting Torah portion. In fact, it's a very interesting book in the Torah. It's the final book of the 5 books of Moses, the book of Devarim. And in the book of Devarim, it speaks about it's basically Moses' going away speech to the Jewish people, getting them ready because they're going to be going into the land of Israel without him. So he's recounting the episodes of the last 40 years of the desert and getting the Jewish people ready to go enter. And there's this week's Torah portion, he covers a little bit of the history as to why the Jewish people were in the desert for such a long time. And I know that there's a joke in the world that Jewish people were so long in the desert because A, they didn't have a GPS, or B, it's because the man didn't stop to ask for directions, and so on and so forth. This is all comedy. It's not really the truth. As we all know, the Jewish people did have a GPS. It was the clouds of glory that led them. And Moses didn't need to ask for directions because God was giving him the directions.
Right.
But it's quite interesting when you look in some of the different chumashim that go through the journeys of the Jewish people, you see that some of the journeys covered a lot of ground in a little bit of time. Like when they left Ramses to go receive the Torah was 49 days, and it was quite a trip to get from point, well, it's not a little less than 49 days, but it took, they went from the first day of Passover till basically Rosh Chodesh Sivan, when they came to Mount Sinai. And that was, they covered a lot of ground. And then, of course, they set up shop and there for quite a while, but then they started to move around. And I think it's in the Gutnik Chumash, you see a picture, and you see the areas. So for 37 years or something, they just made a little circle. It just went like this, in a little bit of a circle. And then finally, towards the end, they picked up a lot of ground, and then they went up into the Jordan area until where Moses passes away. And so that's the journeys of the Jewish people in the desert. So in this week's Torah portion, it's the beginning of Moses' going away speech to the Jewish people. And he's recounting one of the reasons why the Jewish people were in the desert so long. And he reminds us of the story of the spies. What's the story of the spies? And actually, the reason why I'm bringing this up is because it relates very much not only to the Parsha, but also to the upcoming, and we call it a holiday because God willing it will become a very big holiday, the day of Tisha B'Av. Those two things are related to one another, and I'll go into Tisha B'Av in just a moment to give some background to those who are not as familiar. But anyhow, the story of the spies, as you all know, and actually in this week's Torah portion it's clarified that this was not a commandment that came via God. This came because the Jewish people asking for it. Moses clarifies that in this week's parsha when he said, "You approached me and you came to me and you asked me if this is a good idea." So then basically Moses tells us that he went and he talked to God about it, and God said, "If you want to send the spies, send the spies." It's as Rashi tells us back in the Torah portion of Shlach, in the book of Bamidbar, Shlach lecha l'daitecha. Send them according to your own understanding. Ani eidim etzavelach. I am not commanding you to send them. It's up to you if you think it's a good idea. So Moses goes and he selects these 12 men of great status, heads of tribes, all of them, and they go check out the land. As we all know, the end of the story, 10 of them came back and they spoke Lashon Hara. They spoke negatively about the land of Israel, saying like, what a terrible land this is. It swallows its inhabitants. Everywhere that they went, there was always a funeral going on. Countering that, God is saying, of course, I did that for your sake, that everyone in those cities will be busy burying the dead, so you could go and spy out the land. And instead of using it for their benefit, they went and they used it to trash the land of Israel, to talk bad about the land. And and then they said that their terrible statement that we felt ourselves as grasshoppers within our own eyes. very bad lack of self-esteem, that they look at themselves so low. It's not only that they look at us as grasshoppers, but that's the way we ourselves felt as grasshoppers. Very, very low self-esteem. And so these 10 people came back and they talked like that about Israel. We know that the two that were the good guys, as we know, was Joshua, which ended up being the successor of Moses, and Caleb ben Yefuneh, which was, it says that he got the area of Hebron, one of the hot spots in Israel, because instead of going and checking out the whole land and going in with the evil plot of his colleagues, it says that he went to the gravesite of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the Machpelah, Mars HaMachpelah, and he stretched himself out and prayed at their gravesite that God should have compassion upon him, that he should be full of strength to not fall to the peer pressure of his friends. As we all know, he was successful, Baruch Hashem. Mm-hmm. And so those were the two guys, the good guys, and then we had the other 10 guys. Now, what's the outcome of that? The people cry out, and it says in the Torah portion of Shlach, where that's the first time we hear about the story of the spies, that the people cried out on that night. And the Talmud clarifies that it says that what was that night? That night was Tisha B'Av. It was the 9th day of Av. And God told them, you're crying for nothing. I'm going to give you something to cry about on this night. And what we see historically, that night has been the terrible day of Tisha B'Av for the Jewish people. Many negative things have happened to us. It starts with the story of the spies. Then we have the destruction of the first temple by the Babylonians. Then we have the destruction of the second temple by the Romans. And then we have the beginning of the Spanish Inquisition in 1492. And we have the beginning of World War I that led to the terrible Holocaust of World War II. And many terrible things happened. And also historically, for those who don't remember, in 2005, Ariel Sharon was going to give away Gaza on Tisha B'Av, but because he realized that it was going to be on Tisha B'Av, he said he doesn't want to make another terrible thing, so he'll push it off by like 1 or 2 days. So it won't go down in history as another negative thing that happened on Tisha B'Av. But we see Tisha B'Av is just not a good day. So that's like the facts. That's what we see. On the other side, it's quite an interesting Jewish law in regards to Tisha B'Av and the month of Av in general, that there in Jewish law there are some months which are called full months, and there are some months that are called months that are lacking. What this means is the days of the amount of days of the month. The Jewish calendar, as you know, is semi-lunar. And so in the lunar cycle, it comes out in the Jewish calendar, sometimes there are 29 days, and sometimes there are 30 days. And generally, all the months that have 30 days to them are months that contain a major Jewish holiday. That means the month of Tishrei always has a major Jewish holiday. That's the month that has Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur and Sukkot and Shmini Atzeres and Simchas Torah. And we also have, of course, the month of Nisan, which has the holiday of Pesach, and the holiday in the month of Sivan that has the holiday of Shavuot. But the month of Av also always has 30 days to it. So where's the holiday in the month if we don't have a holiday? And what even makes it more interesting is that Yirmiyahu, Jeremiah, in the book of Lamentations, he refers to the day of Tisha B'Av that it's a moed. Moed is a happy day, it's a holiday. Where is there a happy day? All we see is destruction and negativity and terrible things going on, and it starts with the sin of the spies that for generations later we're still crying about everything that has happened. But ultimately, there has to be light at the end of the tunnel, and not only that, but even in the depths of the sorrow, even Yirmiyahu in the book of Lamentations, what does he call that day? It's a moed, it's a happy day. And it falls out in a month that has to have a happy day in it. It's quite an interesting concept. So, this Shabbos, when we're going to be reading the book of Devarim, not the book, but not only from the book of Devarim, the Torah portion of Deuteronomy, of Devarim itself, which contains the story of the spies, which leads to the concept of Tisha B'Av, we have an interesting thing as well, which is the Haftorah of the Parsha. In the Haftorah, we have the Torah reading, and then, in addition, we have the reading of the prophets. because there was a time in Jewish history where the Jews were not allowed to gather to read the Torah. It was illegal. And the rabbis made a system of taking readings from the prophets and something that has a general concept that's related to the Torah portion in the prophets, and that would be the reading for that weekend. And so this way the people would remember what the parsha is because they're reading in the Haftarah. Ultimately, when the decree went away and the Jewish people were allowed to read the Torah again, but the concept of the reading of the Haftarah had been with them for such a long time, it became part of the thing. However, there are a few Haftarahs that don't necessarily relate to the Torah portion. And those are in these past 3 weeks. Right now, in general, we're in what's known as the 3 weeks of mourning. The 3 weeks that it begins with the 17th of Tammuz, the 17th day of the month of Tammuz, in which Moses broke the tablets. And this is also the day that the Babylonians broke through the Romans, not the Babylonians, the Romans broke through the walls. And a lot of terrible things happen. And then the end of the 3 weeks is Tisha B'Av. So it's 3 weeks of destruction, 3 weeks of mourning, 3 negative weeks. And so the Haftorahs for those 3 weeks are 3 weeks of what we call Musar. God is, through the prophets, giving it over the head to the Jewish people, telling them if you don't repent and fix your ways, it's going to be big sorrows, big bad things are going to start happening, unfortunately. And so, by listening to those words, it's supposed to awaken us that we, snap out of it and snap into shape. So we could abolish any terrible thing that would be coming towards us. So these are known as the 3 weeks, and then there are the 3 Haftorahs that speak about Musar. The God's telling the Jewish people to behave. Then after Tisha B'Av, we begin 7 weeks, which are known as the 7 weeks of comfort. The next 7 Haftorahs is going to be comfort because, as you know, unfortunately, when a Jewish person loses an immediate family member, they have a mourning period which is known as Shiva. Shiva is 7 days. So in the sense, God is coming to give us 7 weeks of comfort for the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash, of the Holy Temple. And this is the concept of what we call the Shiva de Nechemta, the 7 Haftorahs of comfort. So this week is the final week of the Musar. God is giving it to us over his head. And the name of the Haftarah is called Chazon Yeshayahu, Isaiah's vision. And it's basically talking about the Jewish people that, God doesn't desire your offerings if you're not honest offering, You got to be sincere. And there's a lot of heavy statements that the prophet tells us all. And then the end is a beautiful statement that he says, Tzion b'mishpat titpadeh v'shaveh b'tzdaka, which means that Tzion, Zion, b'mishpat titpadeh will be redeemed with Torah study, and v'shaveh, and all the inhabitants b'tzdaka, with charity. So it gives us the lesson of the repentance that God is looking for. He wants us to learn more. He wants us to be more charitable towards each other more. And this is the way we can merit the redemption. On top of it, the concept is that the Haftorah is known as Chazon Yeshayahu, the vision. So amongst the traditional Jewish communities, it's known as Shabbat Chazon, the Sabbath of vision. And it's always the Shabbos before Tisha B'Av. Now, God was very kind. He introduced me as a Chabad rabbi. And the Chabad group is a Hasidic group. And from the early Hasidic rabbis, outside of the Chabad movement, they were actually mechutanim. They were related to one another. There was through marriage, there was a great rabbi. His name was Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Berditchev, the Berditchever Rebbe. He was a very lovely person. Always found a positive thing to say about another person. That's kind of a rabbi he was. And he has a famous explanation about this Shabbat. He said that this Shabbat Chazon, doesn't only talk about this concept of the vision of Isaiah talking whatever his deal is, but means that it is the Shabbos that there is God shows the third temple to each and every one of us on the Shabbos. He takes it from the spiritual realms and he lets your soul see it. on this Shabbos, because it's the Shabbos before Tisha B'Av, and God willing, if we do the right things and we motivate ourselves properly, Tisha B'Av becomes transformed to a happy holiday, and we celebrate the third Beis Hamikdash, the third holy temple, with the coming of Mashiach, which is going to lead us soon to redemption, our talk. So he explains it with a story, and he said, once upon a time there was a king, and the king had a beloved son. And what did he do for his son? He gave his son a beautiful suit. The son, there's a term in Yiddish, a wilde chaya. You know what that term means? A wild animal. This kid was like, you take your fancy suit and you go to the sandbox and you start ripping it up and playing like wild, like kids do. So he comes back to his father, and his father's like, oh, yeah. What does he do? He makes him a second suit. And what does the child do? He puts on the second suit, and guess what? He goes climbing the trees. He runs around. He makes himself good and crazy, wild. And the outcome is another ripped suit. And he goes back to his father again, and this time the father gets the tailor to make a third suit. But he says, wait. This suit, I'm not going to give to you yet. I'm going to put it here in the closet. And every once in a while, I'm going to open up the closet, and I'm going to take out the suit, and I'm going to show it to you, so you know what your goal is. This is what you could merit if you show me that you can behave properly, and then I can trust you with this suit. So the Barditchever Rebbe tells us that this is what Shabbos Chazon is all about. We are the child, and God is the king in the story, and God loves us, so what does He do? He gives us a first holy temple. That's our first suit. But we misbehaved. According to the Gemara, it says that the Jewish people, what did they do? They worshipped idols in that time, that there was the murder rate was high, and that people were just not, they were being too happy. In other words, adultery, okay, whatever. Not behaving properly that way. So what does God do? He destroys the holy temple. He sends Yirmiyahu to come warn the people, and the people didn't listen, and there was some other politics going on as well, that King Chizkiyahu went and he tried to make an alliance with Egypt against Babylon, and Egypt wasn't really that interested, and sort of stopped short, and so he was sandwiched by Babylon, and Babylon came and just totally destroyed Jerusalem and killed over 1 million Jewish people during that campaign, and exiled almost all the rest of the Jewish people. There was still a remnant of Jews left in Israel, but almost all of them left, and they went to Babylon for 70 years. A very terrible thing. So that's the first temple, first suit. 70 years later, this Nehemiah and the prophet and so on and so forth, the Jewish people come back, and then there's a second temple. It's a wonderful temple. It lasts longer than the first temple. But what happens? The Jewish people misbehave again. What was the sin? So the Gemara, the Talmud tells us that the sin was baseless hatred. They didn't get along with one another. Can you imagine two Jews not getting along with one another? As there's a famous thing. They say that there's two Jews and there's three opinions. But the Rebbe's way was that there could be two Jews with three opinions, but we recognize that we have one heart. Right. So there's a difference of opinion, but we're all interconnected, so we can get beyond our differences, because essentially we're all united and all one thing. But unfortunately, in the times of the temple, it was a terrible fight that led to a whole bunch of events that led to the destruction of the temple. And because of that, we've been in exile now for almost 2,000 years. And it's a very difficult exile. And it's very hard to find the benefit in the exile. Of course, you have a Hasidic rabbi here with you this evening who's going to try to share some light in the darkness to understand that really this is a blessing from God, so we can truly grow and gain the third temple. Right. Because when we're going to get the third temple, that third temple is that third suit. Right. And it's never going to be destroyed again. Right. So God is going to take it out. It takes it out for us this Shabbos. And He says, look at what you can get if you just fine-tune your behavior. I'm ready to give it to you. But are you ready to accept it? So this is the question that we have to ponder on this weekend on Shabbat Chazon. Okay. There is a concept in regards to exile, because we're speaking about the redemption. We say Yerida Litzorich Aliyah. Yerida is the opposite of Aliyah. It means the descent for the sake of an ascent. The classic case that's discussed in Jewish literature about Yerida Litzorich Aliyah is the descent of the soul into the body. Before a person is born, it says in the Mishnah that against our will we live, and then the Mishnah continues and says against our will we pass away. What is that all about? Because the angels come and tell you, hey, it's time to go down into the world, and you say, no, why do I want to go down there? The Garden of Eden is beautiful. Here we could sit and learn Torah all day. It's like sitting in NETIV all day. You don't have to pay bills. You just sit and learn Torah.
There you go.
Don't worry about being sick. Don't worry about anything. Just sitting and learning. That's what we're all looking forward to when Mashiach comes. It actually says, Maimonides brings it down, that the sages did not want Mashiach to come in order that there should be miracles, in order, like the Medrash tells us, that when Mashiach will come, that on the trees there's going to be like sweets growing from the trees. And all the great super miracles that are going to happen when Mashiach comes, that's not what they were looking forward to. Why were they looking forward to Mashiach? So they could sit and learn Torah all day, without any preoccupation. So we'll be the superpower. Who cares? We don't want to be, okay, it's nice, we'll be the superpower, but we want to sit and learn, and no one should bother us. We want to just sit and learn Torah all day. Right, you're with it, right?
I'm with it. All right. Totally.
Y'all are with it?
Oh, yes.
Okay. So you read the Litzarech Aliyah. So the angels come and get you and come down. No, I don't want to go. I want to stay up here. Okay, what's the end of it? So, oh, down there in the world you could accomplish a lot. Look, there's this mitzvah going on. There's this good deed going on. There's a lot of wonderful things that are taking place. Okay, we'll give it a chance. So this person goes down into the world. And what happens while they're down in the world? They live their life. The life has its ups, it has its downs. But what happens is then we start getting used to this world. And then after 120 years, the angels come and tell you, hey guys, it's time to go back. So the Mishnah tells us, against our will, we pass away. We don't want to go back. We want to stay over here. The angel says, don't worry about it. You've accomplished so much in your life. You earned a place that's much higher than it was before you even came down here in the first place. You see, like in a sense, before you came down into this world, you're over here. Then you go into this deep pit down here. You work this world by doing good deeds, by spreading the word of Hashem, by making this world a dwelling place for God. And then after all that effort, that workout, all of a sudden, when you go back, you don't go back to where you came. You go back even higher. It's like because you've been through so much of an exercise down here, you're much stronger, you're on a much higher level than you were before you came down. This is the concept of Yerida Litzorech Aliyah, a descent for the sake of an ascent. Now we're going to take this concept and apply it to the exile in general. The exile in general, the concept of being in the opposite of redemption, which is the current state where we're currently at, is a big descent. It's not where we need to be. We're exiled from our Father's table. Hashem wants us to be with Him. There should be karbonos, there should be offerings, there should be the holy temple, there should be peace in the world. We should be sitting and learning Torah without having the craziness of what we deal with all the time. That's what there should be. But we see it's not at that yet. Not at that stage. So what are we supposed to do? It's a yerida. It's a down. But we have to realize that we could take the challenges and make them into opportunities. It's all the way you frame it in your mind. It is an exile and it is dark. But don't look at it as a challenge. Look at it as an opportunity for growth. So we have to be able to learn how to look for the light in the darkness. And that's what one of the things we're supposed to do now in the time of exile. I want to just do, I know we don't have a bulletin board over here, but I want to share an interesting thing that the Rebbe spoke about. It comes from classical Jewish sources. That the word for exile in Hebrew is galut. Galut. And another way of spelling it is goleh, which is Gimel, Vav, Lamed Hey. That's the way you spell exile. Redemption is spelled, the word is Geulah. It's spelled Gimel Aleph Vav Lamed Hey. What's the difference between Goleh and Geulah? The Aleph. What does the Aleph represent? Hashem. The Aleph is Alufo Shel Olam. God, the master of the world. So what does it mean? What is the difference between exile and redemption? There is no difference. The only difference is that if you are able to reveal God in the darkness, that is redemption. Because godliness is concealed in exile. You can't see God. And therefore, there's the concealment, and here comes all the tests, and so on and so forth. But when you work at it, by learning and by being spiritually sensitive, and instead of using physical matter in this world for selfish pleasures, but using it for God's sake, you're revealing the spirituality within the physicality, and that elevates, that reveals the Aleph that is sort of imprisoned in the exile, and then all of a sudden you have a state of redemption. You've taken the darkness and you've transformed it into light. And this is the concept of the Jewish people in exile. And not only, I know that we have a mixed community in this learning center. I speak about Jewish people, but this is a universal thing. Because I remember that the Rebbe made a campaign in the late 80s. And is one of the only Jewish leaders of all time that made such a campaign that non-Jewish people have to know about the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach, the 7 Noahide laws, and because that is part of preparing this world for redemption. The Jewish people have their share in what they have to do in order to bring the redemption, but the non-Jews also have their share in what they need to do. And the Rebbe said it's up to us, he was speaking first to the Chabad Hasidim, to go and educate the non-Jewish people that they have Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach, and then they need to become the ambassadors around all the people, so the whole world, there could be a whole shift, a whole movement, that people could start keeping these 7 mitzvahs properly, because Maimonides says this is a very important thing in order to bring Mashiach. Because what's the point of Mashiach? Mashiach, one of the things he's going to accomplish is that the whole world is going to be able to speak to God in one tongue. We're going to have a unified, kind of a religion. There'll be different levels. Of course, the Jewish people will have their job, the non-Jews will have their job, but the whole goal, the whole focus is going to be one thing, which is going to be to know God. And it's going to come through the learning. And certain people have different obligations, but we all are working with the same common goal. And that's in order to know Hashem, through learning and through doing whatever commandments it is that we're obligated to do. So if somebody's going to ask me, Rabbi, as a non-Jew, how can I transform the exile into redemption? So I'm going to give you a few practical notes. Number one, it's a lot about your mindset. You have to train yourself that every time you encounter anything physical, you have to think, how can I redeem God's sparks that are imprisoned within the physical? How do you redeem them? By using them for God's sake, for something positive. I'm going to give you in Hasidic terminology, right? So, if I take a steak, a good steak, from one of the finest glad kosher restaurants in New York. Yes, La Marais. I know this is being live streamed. If they see it, maybe I'll get a discount next time I go. Yeah, there's a nice steakhouse in New York called La Marais. It's on 46th Street. It's a French steakhouse, wonderful steak, and glad kosher. So if I go to that wonderful steakhouse and order this piece of meat, and of course I make the blessing, I pray over it, and I eat it. But what if I eat that steak and then I go home and go to sleep and call it a night? What have I done? Have I elevated the steak? You have to think about elevating the physicality is really what it's all about. If I was thinking about elevating the steak, I'll enjoy the steak, that's okay, I'll give it to you, enjoy the steak. but take the energy of the steak and use it for something positive. If you're using it just to indulge and indulge and indulge, it's like you've become a narcissistic person. It has nothing to do with loving God or loving the steak per se. It's all about loving yourself and how the steak makes you feel. So it's a big shift in how we deal with things. I'm not telling you don't enjoy it. Of course enjoy it, but use it for a positive thing. You could take a pen and you could write wonderful poetry. You could write a wonderful paper. You could write the cure for cancer. You could do a lot of things. You could take that same pen though and write a recipe for a bomb. A homemade bomb. You could take the pen and write terrible, destructive things. Destroy people's lives and marriages with a little pen. That's all it takes. But the question is, what are you going to do once the pen is in your hand? How are you going to act? Are you going to elevate it and bring redemption? Or are you going to throw it down into the realm of evil and bring destruction? So it's all about bringing redemption. Megoleh legeula, from exile to redemption. Revealing the Aleph, Elufa Shalom, God in the world. In every single part of the world that you come into contact with. So I'm giving you all a job. This is one thing that you're going to have to do. Another thing that you can do is, since we all have obligations, the Noahites have their obligations, the Jewish people have their obligations. For whatever reason, the Jewish people have 613 obligations. It's a little more than 7. Anything a Noahide person can do to help a Jewish person accomplish their call of doing the 613 mitzvahs is a very big blessing for you, and also helps bring the redemption much closer. See, that's the difference, because it's not like my religion is better than yours and your religion is better than mine. Our obligations are different, but the whole point is the goal is the same. And if I have a lot of obligations, you want to help me. So at the end of the day, we've all fulfilled our obligations and have brought the goal much closer. So that's another thing that you could be some food for thought. There's an interesting concept that a seed, you go to Home Depot or Lowe's, you buy a nice bag of seeds. Take a seed out of the bag, it's usually a nice, polished, white, beautiful thing. Then you put it inside of the dirt, you put it inside of the ground. What has to happen to that seed in order for something to grow out of it? Which means what? It dies. It rots. It's the Yerida L'Tzorech Aliyah. It's the descent for the sake of an ascent. You take a seed, and in order for it to grow fruit, it has to die, basically. It has to almost get destroyed, rot, take a step back in order to take the step forward. I know that we live in Northeast, this is Northeast Houston. It's a step closer to Texas A&M, agricultural environment. So I wanted to throw that out. If any Longhorns are in the crowd, I'm sorry if I've offended you. Okay. I have a reading, number 5, that says, there's a beautiful Hasidic nigun, a Hasidic song, which says that the soul descends into the body, but it cries, whoa, whoa, like oi, oi, oi. Because the soul is crying. God comforts the soul, and it says, this descent of the soul within the body is for the sake of the ultimate greater ascent. And for this, it is worthwhile. Yeah, you could stop short and say, it's depressing. We're down in this negative environment. Where's the positive? God says, no. The whole descent is an opportunity for growth. It's worth it. Just get to work. Don't complain. Don't cripple yourself with excuses. Don't give yourself all these metaphorical crutches. Stand up Adelante! I'd say something else, but it's a little dirty. Okay, anyways.
And we would understand.
You would. My grandfather, blessed memory, would be proud of me, but I don't want to embarrass him. Okay, anyways. Let's go to, we're number 3 in our lesson. There's this interesting thing that what is the classic Jewish holiday of redemption? The redemption that occurred historically for the Jewish people. Passover. Passover. Do you know that the same day of Tisha B'Av, the Tisha B'Av always falls out on the same day of the week that Passover falls out on? This year, when was the first Seder? Some of you all know because you came to my Seder at the hotel. What night was that? That was a Monday night. Guess what? When is Tisha B'Av? Monday night. What does that come to tell you? That the concept of redemption extends from Passover, and obviously it's parallel to redemption of Tisha B'Av. Because the Tisha B'Av will become transformed into the happiest day on the Jewish calendar. Happier than Simchas Torah, which is the day of rejoicing with the Torah. It's going to be the happiest days because all the negative days, so when Mashiach will come, all the revelation and all the light, because in the darkness, wherever there's the most darkness is the most light, that light's going to come out. And we're going to see it, and we're going to rejoice in it, and we're going to give thanks to God for everything He did to us. Because then we'll understand a little bit, and it will be known. And we'll be happy. So, in the letter A there, I have this thing about Atbash. I don't really want to get into that right now. But the interesting thing is that the first day of Pesach always relates to Tisha B'Av, the same exact thing. And Tisha B'Av, by the way, according to the Talmud, is the day that the soul of Mashiach was born. The soul of the Messiah was born on Tisha B'Av, because that is the healing of Tisha B'Av. The destruction can only be turned around through the redemption which will come about with the coming of Mashiach. I'm going to skip over 4 just for a moment and focus on 5, which is really the bulk of why I think I was asked to come here this evening, and to speak about redemption, and to speak about what's going on in Eretz Yisrael, in the Holy Land right now. It's known that anything that happens in Eretz Yisrael it affects the whole world. Because Israel is the center of the world. And I'm not saying that because I'm pro or anti or whatever it is. I'm saying it factually that when God created the world, it says that the foundation stone of the world is actually right there on the Temple Mount. The whole world came from Israel. Israel is the center of the world. Therefore, when something affects or something is going down in Israel, you can bet that something is happening all over the world. And we're all connected. So therefore, if we want to affect the situation in Israel, we can do it by doing something positive here. And the way you define positive, everybody has their way, and I'm going to get to something in just a few moments. There is a interesting statement in the Gemara, in the Talmud, in the oral tradition, in the tractate of Megillah that says that war is also the beginning of redemption. Whenever there's a war, whenever something is happening in the world, negative like a war, we relate it to the coming of Mashiach. We can hear the footsteps of redemption. The redemption is right around the corner whenever there's a war that happens. I'm going to talk a little bit about a war that happened in our lifetime, happened quite a while back, because it affected Israel and sort of to give us some sort of a way of thinking of what needs to be done now to help Israel, and to sort of feel the energy and the excitement that can come out of this campaign. However negative it is right now, we know that this is the darkness before the light. So I'm going to talk about the 1991 Gulf War. You are familiar with the 1991 Gulf War? Right. I also was familiar. I was a teenager in yeshiva in Los Angeles in 1991, when the Gulf War broke out. At this time of the year, interesting enough, was when Kuwait was taken over by Iraq. I remember because the Rebbe said a talk. It was like the 23rd or the 25th day of Tammuz, and it was not a special day per se, and the Rebbe would only say talks on like a special occasion, but all of a sudden he just started to speak, and he spoke about the concept of the redemption. So people were trying to figure out what's going on. And then it came to light. That's the day that Kuwait was, that they were attacked by Iraq. And Iraq took over Kuwait. Through the following weeks, the Rebbe started quoting a medrash known as the Yalkut Shimoni. And it says it right there, and you can follow along with me in their paper. It says, the leader of Persia, says the medrash, will attack an Arab nation, and the Arab king will go to Aram for advice. The leader of Persia will bring destruction to the entire world, and all of the nations will be struck by panic and fear. Israel will also be overtaken by panic and fear, and they will cry, where shall we go? Where shall we go? Mashiach will then tell them, my children, fear not. Everything I have done for you. Why are you afraid? Do not fear. The time of your redemption or your liberation has arrived. So this is what the Medrash says. It was written, over 1,000 years before the Gulf War. And the Rebbe mentioned this Medrash many times, saying that the king of Persia could clearly be Iraq. And Aram, he related all the different countries and what came to play. And he related the fear of the Jewish people in Israel. Because I don't know if you remember, but in Israel people were very scared about the chemical warfare. The potential chemical warfare that supposedly Saddam Hussein claimed that he had the heads that would go on top of the Scud missiles would fall and would release gas, and it would kill a lot of people. And Saddam had already killed a lot of people, the Kurds, a short while before, so we knew that he wasn't playing with a full deck and didn't respect life so much that he was willing to just go and wipe people out. So the people in Israel got very, very nervous, and they were making what was called a sealed room. Cheder Khatum, I think was what they called it in Hebrew. And every house had to have one, because if there would be a chemical attack, you'd have one sealed off room, and people would go in there with their gas masks, and there were a whole bunch of opinions amongst the rabbis that if you have a beard, can you shave your beard? Because a lot of Jewish people don't shave. Can you shave your beard in order to put your mask on? And it was a real scary, scary time. There was a lot of anxiety. And I remember, so this happened in the summer of 1990. The war began in, I believe it was January or February 1991. Till that point, people would come to the Rebbe and ask him if they should cancel a wedding, if they should bring their children home from Israel, that the kids would go learn from America. And constantly throughout all this time, the Rebbe would say, no, don't even tell anybody that you're considering taking your kids out of Israel. You should know that it says in Tehillim, in Psalms 121, Hine lo yanum velo yishan shem Yisrael. Behold, the guardian of Israel neither sleeps or slumbers. There is a God, and God is watching out, and He said that Eine Hashem Elokecha b'mireshis hashana v'ad achris hashana, that the eyes of God are upon the land from the beginning of the year to the end of the year. And it's the safest place in the world. Don't run away from Israel. You got to stay in Israel. You have to strengthen Israel. Nothing's going to happen. So, of course, those who are familiar with the Hasidic world, when the Rebbe says something, when the leader will say something, the Hasidim follow it. Because we believe that our Rebbe has holy insight, spiritual insight, and when he's saying something, he's just not talking grandmother tales. He's saying it because spiritually he's in tune to what's going on, and there is something positive, and so therefore we got to listen. So it's quite interesting. They said when the Scuds were being shot into Israel, there were some Hasidim in Kfar Chabad, as the missiles were flying overhead, that they were sitting and dancing outside to show that their faith, that there's nothing going to happen. And in fact, I remember on Shabbos, that first Shabbos of the war, when the war finally began, we were all very nervous. Israel had already they shot a few scuds, and we were scared that Shabbos was going to be a very scary time. And the Rebbe issued a telegram right before Shabbat, telling the Hasidim that the happy days, Uviyom Simchaschem, it says in the Torah, and the days of your rejoicing. So the commentaries say, Elu Shabbos, the days of your rejoicing, this is Sabbath. So therefore, Sabbath has to be celebrated with extra joy. And so the Hasidim partied in Israel. As everyone else is sitting and nervous, we're all excited. Why is that? Because this is the war right before Mashiach. The Rebbe was saying that, look, the Yalkut Shimoni says from the outcome of this war, that it's the time for our redemption has arrived. So there was this wonderful energy. We were riding high. And then came the ground war. And right away, what was told was going to be a long time, Purim. The holiday of Purim came, and the whole war was over. Just like that. Unfortunately, the war was not taking care of what should have happened, because spiritually, the Rebbe had said it wasn't printed for whatever reason, that America has to finish the job all the way. And as we know, in 1991, they didn't finish the job. And that's why we had to go back in with George W. Bush years later, and whatever Iraq, the whole fiasco is all the outcome because we didn't finish the war right then. It was an opportune time. After the war completed on Purim, about a month later and a week after, was right after the holiday of Passover. And at that point, the Rebbe was on a campaign saying that we have to be cognizant, we have to recognize that many miracles happened during this war in regards to the Holy Land. From all the Scud missiles that landed in Israel, factually speaking, one person passed away and it was from shock. It wasn't from a direct hit. And there were a lot of Scud missiles that flew into Israel. And the Patriot system was not as good as this Iron Dome system that's there now. But it was clearly the hand of God was deflecting the missiles. Because, as we said, the eyes of God are upon the land from the beginning of the year till the end of the year. So there was a lot of wonderful spirituality. And the Rebbe says we have to recognize when a miracle happens, we have to be thankful to God and recognize it. Human nature is very unfortunate. They say that story about holiday time in America when you're trying to get a parking space. So one person is driving around and he's going up and down the aisles. You have that mall there on 1960 and 59, right? It's your closest mall there. And you know how busy it can get in December. And you're trying to find... God forbid, you shouldn't. Then we're not... It's like we could have the redemption right now. And going back at the 1967 war, there were so many miracles that came about in that 6-day war, and unfortunately all the people were going around saying it's because we have a strong army. And so a lot of the big spiritual leaders, and the Rebbe himself also had said something to the effect that if the people would have just come to the vocalization of thanks, that it's God, it's all coming from God, Mashiach would have come, because God set up a ketz, He set up a potential end time, and the people failed the test. Because instead of being thankful to where they should have been, it became, about themselves. So let's go to the next paragraph. Over there, the Rebbe says, despite the situation, the Rebbe says, in Israel, talking about this whole thing with the Gulf War, there was no reason to become confounded or fearful. On the contrary, the confrontation was heralding the time of our redemption, the moment in history when the authentic spiritual and moral core of humanity will emerge in its full splendor, and heaven will become one with earth. So basically, a war that is being orchestrated, especially in Israel, and this applies to all the wars, is a potential for Mashiach. point is we have to be plugged into that. Don't get carried away with stupidities. It's not a Facebook war about who can put the better propaganda up. That's not going to bring Mashiach. I promise you. That's wasting time.
Right.
During the next months, what did the Rebbe say? It says here in the notes, he reiterated that the Medrash words many times, and he called on the people, the Jewish people in the world, to replace fear with courage and confusion with determination. We ought to prepare ourselves and the world at large for the great spiritual revolution that will engulf the globe by increasing in the study of Torah and the observance of commandments and acts of goodness and kindness. That's what we have to be focused on. Each and every one of us, the Rebbe suggested, should be teaching himself and the surrounding world about a higher way of living, a life of ethics, honesty, goodness, and peace, a life of Mashiach. Ladies and gentlemen, the Rebbe spoke about this in 1991. The words of the righteous live on.
Right.
It's just as pertinent today in 2014. Let us, may it be Hashem's will, that we're now in the 9 days, which is the days of sadness, but they could be transformed to the days of happiness. All it takes is we got to bring the Aleph into our life, from exile to redemption. And how can we do that? By learning more Torah, doing more mitzvahs, and doing mitzvahs carefully. I know in Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Yonah world, I'm going to share with you a Jewish concept. We use this term, doing mitzvahs behidur, which means doing mitzvahs in a strict and beautiful way. For example, a person needs to have a Jewish person needs to have a mezuzah on their door. There are many ways of accomplishing this. You can go to eBay and buy a mezuzah. Some people think, okay, to buy a mezuzah means to have the nicest metal or wooden or artistic looking case and hanging that on your door. The fact is that that's not the mezuzah, that's the mezuzah case.
Right.
The mezuzah is the scroll that goes inside. So some people will say, you know what are my priorities in life? Would I rather have $50 a month to buy cafe lattes or soy latte chai teas in Starbucks every day? Or can I take the same $50 and buy the nicest scroll for my mezuzah? Or do I buy the photocopied one, which is not kosher? Or do I buy the very cheap one because I got to budget my money for better things? You understand? Don't be cheap on God.
Right.
Use, for mitzvahs, it has to be behid, it has to be beautiful. Don't look for the easy way out. You know, I'm a child of the 80s, and in our days there was that cheap car called the Yugo. Remember the Yugo? It was the cheapest car out there. So, I'm not saying that if you can only afford the Yugo, that's all you could afford. But let's say you had $25,000 to buy a car. And you said, you know what, I could either buy a Yugo or I could buy a nice Toyota. So what should you buy? So from a physical perspective, it makes sense to buy the Toyota over the Yugo. The Yugo is going to be in the shop every other day. You're going to pay cheap now and pay longer from that. And then the car, it's not going to be worth it. So the real Jewish way of dealing with it is if you have $25,000, take 10% and give it to tzedakah.
Right.
It's always nice.
Right.
And buy something that would be beautiful, that you can that you could use it and it can take you from point A to B, so you can do more good things, not waste all your time in the shop. Same thing is in regards to the mitzvahs that we do. Don't be cheap on mitzvahs. It's not worth it. Be cheap on Starbucks. Be cheap on the place, on vacations. I understand people work hard, they need to take a vacation, right? But you don't have to take the Carnival cruise, the 10-day cruise. You can take the 7-day cruise. And then from the extra 3 days, take that money and do something else. Benefit the world. I'm not saying don't go on a cruise at all. You can have a little bit of fun. But everything in measure.
Right.
Bring the Aleph into the world. That's what it's all about, my friends. So this is the time of the year where we're focused on the transformation. We should peel away the layers of darkness and behold the light of the redemption which is close at hand. And then these days will be turned, as it says in Yirmiyahu, I will turn their mourning into joy and will confront them and comfort them and make them rejoice from their sorrow. And Maimonides says all of these fast days in the end will be nullified in the era of Mashiach. Indeed, they will be festivals and days of joy and happiness.
Yes.
May it be Hashem's will that we merit the coming of Mashiach speedily in our days, speedily. Amen.
Amen. Baruch Hashem.
Thank you very much.
You want to do a question and answer
Yes,
period now?
of course.
Right.
Do Q&A.
Is that all right?
It's
Do you have
100%.
time?
100, yeah, I have time.
Okay, just want to make
If
sure.
you have time, I have time.
Questions, answers, comments, whatever. Questions? Leslie?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Couple, but, you were talking about the Goleh and the Geulah. And you said that the Goleh is missing the Aleph and the Geulah has the Aleph.
Uh-huh.
And then you were talking about the idea of missing the light. Now, to take that a step further, would that be the or, the Hebrew word or, Aleph, Vav, Resh, the Aleph meaning the light?
Well,
Is that holistic or is that?
you could say that, but the Jewish source that talks about the Aleph uses the term alufo shel olam, or which means master of the world, meaning that godliness, which could be represented in light, is not revealed. It's concealed, and that's why you have exile. But it's up to us in the exile to reveal that or that light, which is how God is the master of the world, or which is the concept of spirituality. Right?
Now, you also said, you're not going to go into it, but I'm looking at the Hebrew letters because I'm familiar with the Hebrew
Atbash.
letters. Okay?
Yeah.
And Aleph, the A, second page,
Yeah.
you said
Yeah.
Aleph is the Tav. So you're taking the beginning of the alphabet,
Yeah.
the
And the
alphabet,
end.
and the end.
Those letters are interchangeable, and the Kabbalah talks about this concept of atbash. You take the first letter and the last letter, and they can flip one to the next.
And then you have holidays that begin or have something to do with all the way.
Okay, so what he does is like this. I'll do, since you're asking, I'll do that chart.
Can you go to Zion, then the letter before that?
No. What this chart is doing is, it's a famous explanation that the first 6 letters of the holidays is, the first 6 letters of the alphabet is Aleph, Beis, Gimel, Dalet, Hey, Vav, right?
Uh-huh.
And if you're doing Atbash, so that means that you reflect, instead of the first letter, what's the last letter? Is Tav. So Aleph is reflected in Tav. Bet is in Shin, Gimel is in Reish, Dalet is in Kuf, Hey is in Sadik, and Vav is in Pei. So what he's saying is Aleph, Beis, Gimel, Dalet, Hey, Vav, those 6 letters correspond to the first 6 days of Passover. So first day of Passover always is the first day of Tisha B'Av. The second day of Passover is the holiday of Shavuos. The third day of Passover is Rosh Hashanah. The fourth day of Passover is the same day of the week as Simchas Torah. Why is that? Because Kuf. And what's Kuf? Kuf stands for the concept of Kriyat HaTorah, which means to read the Torah, which is the end of the reading cycle. Hey corresponds to the letter Tzadik, and Tzadik is the first letter of the word Tzom, which means a fast. And that's the day of Yom Kippur. And Vav corresponds to the letter Pei, which corresponds to the holiday of Purim. So basically what that statement is saying is that Passover is represented, the concept of redemption, in all of these different holidays. And the first day of Passover always is found in the first day of Tisha B'Av. And that's what that chart does. You follow?
Sort of.
Más o menos?
Not completely.
Okay.
But I'm just like going down, like in my mind,
Yeah.
I'm going down with the letters that come before,
Right.
or the letters that come before the other way,
Right.
because you said you have to be down to go up.
Right.
You know, you made that statement earlier.
Uh-huh.
So this is kind of like Aleph is down, but you're going up, and you've got a holiday.
So that was a different concept. Yerida L'Tzorech
Yeah,
Aliyah is one
Oh,
concept.
So this is different.
Yeah, this is Adbash has nothing to do with Yerida L'Tzorech Aliyah. Adbash was just telling you how Passover, which represents redemption, is always related to the first day of the first day of Passover is always related to the day that Tisha B'Av, which seemingly doesn't make sense because Tisha B'Av is not a day of redemption. But what I taught you this evening is that in potential Tisha B'Av is the day of redemption. It's the day that the neshama of Mashiach was born, and if we behave properly and Mashiach will come, Tisha B'Av is going to become the holiday of redemption. So therefore, that first day of Passover, which is redemption, shines clearly within the holiday of Passover, because they both celebrate the same concept of redemption.
Yes, when we drink a cup of redemption, Passover, we have 4 cups of wine.
No, but it's redemption from Egypt.
Right.
Right. The idea
So,
is
so,
we
so,
remember
so
them.
Mashiach is Tisha B'Av. That's redemption from this exile called the Edomite
Okay,
exile.
Now I get it.
Now you got it, okay,
I
yeah.
got connected.
Okay, thank you. No, thanks for asking me to clarify. Anybody else?
Well, if it doesn't happen on this Tisha B'Av, then you're not saying that Mashiach will come on Tisha B'Av.
No, Mashiach doesn't have to come on Tisha B'Av. Mashiach can come right now.
Right, I just wanted
And then when Tisha B'Av will be here, Mashiach will already be here. But the point is that the neshama of Mashiach was born on Tisha B'Av. It doesn't mean that means that he's going to come on Tisha B'Av.
Right.
And Chas v'shalom, every day has its Mashiach potential. The question is if all the dots line up properly, that will be the day. So, but we got to all attempt to do what we got to do to make it happen each day.
I had a quick question or comment, and then I'd like you to maybe expound on the comment. Had a 5-hour conversation with a friend of mine in Israel, and we're going through the same dialogue about what really needs to happen, right? This isn't about missiles and wars and fighting. It's about transforming your soul and all those things, and the people and the nations doing that. Do you see that this time is a bit different, the way people are handling it, as far as the
One thing I see clearly
the
different.
secular Jewish and even people in the world? I'm seeing people in the nations are starting, like something's happened, there's a shift taking place. Do you see that, or is it just my...
The Rebbe said in Tavshin and Beis in 1992, which is right before he had a stroke, and then he wouldn't talk anymore, that there's already that this generation is the generation that will merit the redemption. And the reason, and he explained it because he said that we've been in exile for many years. So you could ask a question and say, the previous generations had more merit, and I'm going to get to your answer. I'm going this way. We'll get to it. The previous generations had a lot more merit to them that seemingly they should have had Mashiach. Why? Look at it. Like, I'm looking at I see pictures of my great-great-great-great-grandfather. He had a big beard. He was a pious man. And I'm sure his whole family was more pious than my family is pious. But they didn't merit to have Mashiach. So how in the world can I say that this generation is going to be the one to merit it when they didn't merit it? So the Rebbe explained it, and he said it's like an analogy of a midget on giants' shoulders, saying that they are the giants, but unfortunately they couldn't get to the goal. We are the midgets, and what it is that it's a collective energy. They accomplished this much, but it's just this much short. So our accomplishments above their accomplishments stack up and brings that whole shift into the world. So the Rebbe said we could already see that the world has changed in this generation compared to generations ago. Why? He says because in other generations, like for example, war was a wonderful thing. It was a heroic thing. Everybody loved going to war. Everybody liked a good, juicy, bloody battle. You know, in the dark ages of people, it was gross what was going on over there. And then all of a sudden you have the 60s. Make love, not war. No war, burn your cross. All this mishagas going on. That's like a total flip of where the world was.
Right.
So how do you get from here to there? It's because of the accumulation of spiritual accomplishments have been going on all over these years, and slowly it's trickling down into our psyche, into the whole world, which the Rebbe has told us that's how you know it's the sign of Mashiach. That's how you know that the redemption is so close, because of the shift in the world. So now, unfortunately, I have not heard the Rebbe speak since 1992, since he had his stroke, and he passed in 1994, but I can take his concept and relate easily over here. With one thing, I think this is the first time in my life that I've seen Egypt be on Israel's side.
Right.
That's pretty amazing.
Right.
It never happened. It never used to happen. And that a lot of the people are saying, okay, they always used to say restraint. And then America would say restraint, but do your job. And now many nations are saying, do your job, do your job. That already shows the massive shift of what's going on. Of course, remember, it's never going to be, until Mashiach comes, it won't be a complete picture. There's going to be a big shift. There's going to be a lot of positive things going on. And just as much as that, there's going to be also a tremendous amount of negativity. Because God made the opposites of one thing of another. And as long as we're in exile, the evil side is going to try its best to stay in business and to derail any positive thing. So don't fall for it. Be focused and let's keep on with the neck chip away. Keep the energy going because we're going to accomplish. We are the midgets, but we are the ones who are going to get over the top. Because our grandparents were so great. That's why we can accomplish. But our accomplishments are the closing accomplishments. We're the cherry on the ice cream.
That's good. That's good.
Any more questions? Yeah.
I didn't quite understand what you were talking about earlier about the soul. When it's told it needs to come to earth, it resists. I understand that part of it.
Right.
But then after it's here and it's time to go back, it doesn't want to go back. Does it forget where it came from, or why would it want to stay and not want to go back to that?
When the soul enters the body at first, so it's a partnership of soul and body. And the soul is so on opposite of, it's not merged so well with the body, because the body represents concealment and the soul represents revelation. All the negative attributes we speak about, ego and narcissism, all this is not a spiritual thing. This is because of physicality. But after so many years, the two things, they sort of merge. The soul, it's a figure of speech. The soul, of course, part of it wants to go back. It wants to go back to its creator. But there's part of within the conscious of the person, which is also within spirituality, that says, no, I don't want to go, because the merge has worked so well. I have so much in this world. I don't want to say goodbye and go to the next world. And we have to recognize that this world is just a passing through chamber. There's something better on the other side. Any more?
Any more questions? Is that it? You guys are yappers any other time, and you give me the hard
Did
questions.
I put you to sleep? No.
And you let him off the hook. Give him some hard questions.
Well, I'm applying all of what he's saying
Yeah.
to right now, what's happening in Israel, and I've become almost full of joy. I mean, it's about what I'm seeing is happening in people and even nations, as you were saying. So, I'm just enjoying what you just said.
Baruch Hashem.
Shucks.
So be besimcha, be happy.
Right.
Yeah. Well, we really, go ahead.
I was going to say, it is different.
Yeah.
It is different from other wars, and it is, I see that more Jewish people are starting to practice the Jewish ways, and they're more, for instance, a friend of mine a co-worker of mine found out that they were Jews from Jerusalem. And he found out about 2-3 weeks ago, his last name's Cohen, and he found out that he's from the Levi tribe. And he's been going back and studying and trying to learn what his responsibilities are. And when he lived a very secular life. He had a business, and that's all he worried about was things of this world. So I can see where this generation is making a lot of changes.
So now, whenever you come in contact with a Jewish person, being out here in Humble especially, let them know that the high holidays are coming, and it's a good thing if they go hear the shofar.
Right.
It's a good thing if they go do this, if they go do that. It's a good thing if they even come here to NETIV and learn some Torah. It's good for their soul. Any influence you can have on anybody, you can have influence on non-Jewish people as well. But I'm just saying, if you could also help the Jewish people to accomplish their 613 commandments, you've done great. It's sort of different from like a Christian philosophies, right? I'm not trying to save the other person that they have to believe like me and go my way.
Right.
No, be successful at your way. I want to help you do it your way.
Right, that's a good
And
idea.
find your
It's an
identity.
interesting thought.
Right.
And find their identity.
Yeah. Yeah.
I explained, I think it was last class, we were just talking about how by you helping someone else do a mitzvah, you
It's like
are
you're
getting that mitzvah as if you've done it
become
yourself.
like a part of it. Yeah.
Right, so you're part of that, yeah.
Good, good.
Rabbi Manis Friedman said in something I was listening to recently, and he was talking about the days of Mashiach, and he said that many people aren't wanting him to come, but he says we shouldn't be timid in Mashiach coming because we have such days of darkness now that, and I can't understand that quite because it seems to me like your ancestors had much, much more darkness and days that where they couldn't read Torah and so forth and so on, and great persecution, horrible, horrible stuff.
Right.
And so for me, I couldn't comprehend that these were greater days of darkness. But he said, because of the greatness of the darkness, that when he comes, he's going to rejoice over us because we have at least made some form of teshuvah, you know?
The days of darkness that he's referring to is because, for example, the assimilation rate of the Jewish people is like the highest of all times. In fact, they had this non-religious study, the Pew study, that came out like this year or about a year ago, talking about how far the rate of intermarriage has gone, assimilation, people being disinterested. So yes, persecution was a physical persecution, but this is the age of the spiritual Holocaust. So you say, Chas v'shalom, it shouldn't ever be. But it's a different kind of darkness.
It's more deceptive.
Yeah. That's what he's talking about. So yeah, there were people that they were persecuted about reading Torah, learning Torah, but you know what? They gave up their lives for Torah.
Right.
I'm not gonna, God forbid, we should never come to such a test, but who knows how people would respond. They're like, what's Torah? You know, some people will say, what, I'm persecuted? I don't even know what this thing is. That's how dark it is.
Yeah.
That's how dark it is. But on the other side, there's a lot of light because of the dissemination of the Torah, how available it is, that you can go and watch NETIV.org and even stay at, well, hopefully you should come here, but I'm saying if you, later on, you can look it up at home and still watch it and be inspired.
That we shouldn't be timid when Mashiach, wanting Mashiach to
No.
come. That,
Be proud of it.
I had a problem with that for a while. And when I heard him say that, it was just kind of freeing. But I didn't understand the darkness.
The darkness.
You
Yeah, but
described it
we
right.
shouldn't be timid. We should be proud. But being proud doesn't mean to rip the other person's nose off.
Right.
You gotta. It has to be a positive pride, and you have to be confident in yourself of where you are and where this is going.
You know, I really don't say a whole lot to the group about the effect. Occasionally I'll mention it, but we're just about at the point right now of hitting 40,000 hits a month going to the website. We're talking about every week, someone will email me or text me from some part of the country or some part of the world, from New Zealand, most of the English-speaking countries, to either talk about what it would take for them to be Bali Tshuva, to return, become religious, or a non-Jew wanting to take a hold of the yoke of heaven. And it's amazing that this little place with a little live stream, with a deep desire for authenticity, is having that impact. But it's not us, it's the fact that there are people in such darkness, when they see a little bit of light, they run to it. That's what's amazing. So we're living in unique times that our little bit of mitzvah will go a long ways. And I'm glad you mentioned the whole thing about the mission thing. That's perfect. We can't think of ourselves as like, oh, we're accomplishing all this when we're on the giant shoulders.
Right.
That's beautiful. Very good.
Can you speak about, I've heard of if we know the Mashiach is supposed to come when there's a certain time that there's no war, that people are getting along together.
That's an accomplishment of when Mashiach comes. That's not a precursor. Actually, on the contrary, the Tanakh speaks about Melchamas Gog and Magog, big war of Gog and Magog happening right before Mashiach comes.
Right.
It's going to be very turbulent before Mashiach comes. Now, one flip thing that maybe y'all, I know, have not heard unless one of your speakers was a Chabad rabbi before, but the previous Rebbe said that we don't necessarily, that first of all, there's a concept in prophecies that positive prophecies have to happen, negative prophecies can be averted. Don't have to happen. Because positive prophecy has to happen and negative prophecy can change by tshuva. You do repentance, you do good things, a negative prophecy doesn't have to happen. You can avert it, change it around. So he said in regards to the war of Gog and Magog, that because we've been in exile for too long, and we've already suffered so much that it could already be averted. We don't have to specifically go to such an extent of Gog and Magog the way it's discussed in the Tanakh. Because it's a negative prophecy. It doesn't have to be that way. We could transform and make it happen in a more positive way.
No, but I've always heard, not always, but teacher, rabbi, or somebody has said to me once before that the Mashiach can't come because of all the troubles that are happening in the world. And the world has to be made good before there is a Mashiach.
Okay, so I know, I understand what you're saying, and it's true, but it's not in regards to the war as much as it's that in order to bring Mashiach, there's this concept of tikkun olam, which means to fix the world, right? To repair the world. To repair the world spiritually, through doing spiritual positive acts. So we have to bring the world to such a point of repairing in order for Mashiach to come. Mashiach is not going to come to a totally broken world. But then it goes back to what I was saying before, that even though in a revealed way we see a lot of broken things, but nonetheless we also see that there's been thousands of years of spiritual accomplishments and goodness which have brought the world to a certain state where Mashiach can come. We're at the threshold and we're about to cross over. It's not going to be perfect. Mashiach is going to bring the perfection.
Right.
But we have to create the vessel in order for Mashiach to bring the perfection.
Right.
That's what God is waiting for.
Right. It's beautiful. Good job.
Be ready.
Let's get ready, guys.
Yeah, be
Let's
ready.
do it.
Ready or not, here it comes.
That's right.
Yeah.
All right.
Let's please give him a big
Thank you
hand.
very
Thank you so much for